Hi guys, today I've got something super exciting for you. Today we are going to be using some stained glass techniques on things that aren't stained glass. So I'm going to grab some plates from Goodwill, I'm going to break them up, find some pieces that I like, wrap them in some stained glass, and make some super cool earrings out of them. So follow along and see how it goes.
So, as mentioned, this is a similar technique to stained glass wrapping. It's the Tiffany style of stained glass. So if you watch that video, or if you're familiar with stained glass work at all, we will be using a very similar process today to make some really cool earrings out of plates. So obviously the first step is to process the plates that I bought at Goodwill into something of a manageable size and hopefully a manageable shape. So you can see I bought all of these plates at Goodwill for $1 or $2. I didn't need more than 1 or 2 of each, and I just went for patterns. And also something to look for is plates that are flat. The flatter the better, just so that you have something kind of easy to work with and a shape that you can wrap easily with foil. So I tried a bunch of things to break these plates. I tried this kind of standard glass cutter with the metal blade, the roller blade. I tried smacking it a bunch of times, going over that line a couple times, smacking it on the edge of a board, doing the back as well. Ceramic is a lot harder to break than glass, like a lot harder. I ended up having to pull out
the mallet.
This broke the plate into manageable chunks, and after this it was actually a little easier to break with the running pliers from my standard stained glass kit. So I'm just trying to make pairs of shapes, or pairs of similar shapes, so that I have earrings that are about the same shape and size down the road. I'm going to keep a couple super interesting pieces that I wasn't able to make a duplicate of, or something that was similar enough to make a pair out of, and I'll use those as pendants or something else. Also, something to note is that the type of ceramic that the plate is made of actually makes it way harder or way easier to work with, both breaking it and later grinding it. I found that each plate had a very different workability. This plate particularly that I'm breaking up here, I believe is actually porcelain and was significantly harder to work with. I had some chipping of the glaze as I worked. It did run very much like glass, so I was able to cut the shapes I wanted, but the actual workability was a little harder because it was a very brittle material, as opposed to some of the other stoneware plates that I picked up that were a little easier to work with. You also want to be sure to avoid any plates with these kind of, well, I mean, all plates have the ridges, right? The ups and the downs, and then the little foot on the bottom. But if your pattern overlaps that, that's not going to be a usable piece of the plate. So pay attention to where the bulk of the pattern is in relation to those thicker parts of plate that are kind of harder to work with. So here, this flower actually was in a great spot. I ended up breaking it in half later just because of how brittle this clay was. And I actually liked some of the edge pieces of these plates, so I'm actually going to just foil 3 sides rather than all 4 sides. This plate here is a stoneware plate, and it was actually the easiest plate that I worked with today. I also love that there's kind of pattern on almost all parts of the plate, so I was able to use the most pieces of this plate, like be the most efficient with breaking up a plate, which granted we're saving all of these from the trash bin anyways, but the more we can use the better. And definitely avoid bowls. I absolutely hated breaking this thing apart, and it ended up being really crazy thick and curvy, so it was really hard to foil and work with. The flatter the better, and bowls aren't flat. Next, I'm going to break out the grinder, just a standard stained glass grinder. I'll leave a link to one on Amazon below, but I'm just going to grind the edges of these. This gets rid of those extra sharp edges. Obviously, be careful with the edges as you grind and as you work. I found that the ceramic is really nasty to get into your fingers, like almost worse than glass. It kind of shards into smaller pieces and it's very unpleasant, so avoid sharp bits, use gloves if you're that kind of person. I'm clearly not. Use eye protection, all that good stuff. So again, here you can see that I am struggling with this porcelain plate. I chipped that piece of glaze. I am still going to use this piece. I think the foil will cover most of the chip, so it won't be a problem. So after I went ahead and got all of these nice and ground down, and I wiped off the edges so that there wasn't any remaining residue, I went ahead and foiled all the edges. I'm using 1/4 inch foil here, and that worked for most pieces. There were a couple pieces where I ended up putting 2 pieces of foil side by side just because I wanted a thicker piece of the plate, or like on this piece I was ending the foil and I want to make sure that that doesn't slide off. So I bought some solder. This is plumbing solder, which is lead free, and that's important because it's going to be near your skin, it's going to be on your body. You don't want the leaded solder. And I tried to use the flux that this came with. It's kind of this goopy, pasty texture, and it was really sticky and didn't burn away as I was soldering as much as a liquid flux does that I'm used to. And I was really struggling both with this flux as well as the tip, because I was using just kind of a standard solder iron tip, which was very difficult to work with. It's very difficult to get the solder as hot as I need it to be with this tip. But I went ahead and made a couple of earrings just to see how it worked, and it did function. So if you want to go buy a super cheap soldering iron, just make sure it can get hot enough to melt the lead-free solder, and then a standard plumbing solder kit, it is doable, but it's not easy. I got these solder tips on Amazon for a couple of bucks, totally worth the upgrade. It was much easier to get everything melted the right way, and I'm using a stained glass flux. It doesn't actually matter if the solder is lead free or has lead in it, the flux works either way. It's really just cleaning up the copper, and the solder will stick either way, which is great. I don't have to use that really nasty goopy stuff that came with my kit. So don't bother buying a kit because I didn't use the solder. Just buy plumbing solder or another silver solder that is lead free. I used just a basic copper wire to twist my own little loops at the top of these earrings and solder those into place. The trick with these tiny pieces is that you can't touch them anywhere. When you're working with a larger piece of stained glass, you can touch further away from the solder and not actually burn your fingers, but because these pieces are so tiny, you kind of have to use a pair of pliers or else you're going to burn your hands, which made things a bit awkward sometimes. But I made it through, and I'm just going to really quick clean up the solder. There's a bunch of kind of residue from the soldering process. I'm just going to wipe that off with some basic steel wool, and then we're going to put a black patina on this solder. Now supposedly a copper patina will also work, but I did try my copper patina and I don't know if I hadn't cleaned the solder up well enough or if it really is the type of solder that is important with the copper, but I wasn't able to get the copper to show up properly. So I used the black and I'm totally happy with it. It ended up working out just fine. So let's just do the rest of these. And that's it. This was actually a super easy project. Takes a bit of time, but so fun, so easy, and such high reward. Look at how amazing these pieces turned out. I'm so thrilled to wear some of these.
I am very excited to have these at a market here in San Antonio on the 24th. So if you're local to San Antonio and you know where the Dakota Ice House is, stop by on the 24th of February 2023 and say hi.
Anyways, hope y'all have a wonderful time trying this, or at least enjoyed watching the video. I hope to see y'all again soon. Bye!